Hi, in this video I am going to tell you something about doing the literature review, and it is about the what and how. So let's start with the what. So what is the literature review and how does it relate to your research? Well, if we look at the different scientific disciplines, we see that there is a little bit of a difference between the natural science and the engineering sciences in relation to the social scientific sciences and how the literature review is used. Where in the engineering and the natural sciences, the literature review is mostly used as a background and to define the state of the art and to define what are the knowledge gaps in order to refine your research question. In the social sciences, we see that the literature review is mostly used to create a conceptual framework. And so we question, okay, how can I actually understand my research objective? In your proposal, we would see that the literature review is between your introduction and your research questions, and then we also see how that relates, so that you have shown that you've been able to study the literature, and from that literature review, you have been able to refine your research questions. So, why are we doing this literature review? Well, as said, it's to identify the state of the art. So what is already known about the topic? What are the issues that the academic community studying this topic is debating, and how is your research then maybe contributing to that debate? It has the intention then to define maybe some knowledge gaps or what are interesting scientific puzzles out there, and to specify your research question further. And with your literature review, you can explain why it's also interesting then to do this research. So it also helps you for your research justification. Well, some pitfalls when people are writing a literature review. It's not a container, and I'm going to explain what I mean with it. And it's not about finding answers, and it requires you to stay critical on the literature that you review. So what do I mean with a container? So oftentimes you see in literature reviews that people per paragraph, they use basically one reference, one author. So in paragraph 1, it's about Acevedo says this. Then in paragraph 2, Kamerink 2019 says that. And then Evers 2012 argues sus and so. So it is just a collection of references, almost reading like what we call an annotated bibliography, rather than that it's about your own line of reasoning in which you make use of what others have been doing and saying and writing about. So there's no clear line of reasoning. It's just a presentation of some different views, perspectives, ideas of others. A literature review is also not about finding answers to your preliminary research question. So the literature review does not need to lead also to answering your question. No, it needs to lead to specifying your and refining your research question further. That does not mean, of course, that you do not make a conclusion on your literature review. But that conclusion is then about what is maybe the knowledge gap, or presenting a conceptual framework. So to say, okay, from my literature review, this is an interesting way to understand what the problem that I would like to research. So keep in mind that you are doing a literature review in order to refine and specify your research question. So your conclusions are related to that. And so not trying to already answer your research question. If you are able to answer your research question by reviewing the literature, well, either your research method is a literature review, or you see, okay, the research question can be answered by the literature, so I need to do something different that is more novel or innovative or interesting, or creative. Stay critical. When you are retrieving literature and when you are reading literature, stay critical on the sources. And so ask yourself, for example, the arguments that are made in a particular paper, is it supported by empirical evidence? Is the literature that I have found and retrieved, from what kind of journal is it coming from? Is it from a peer-reviewed scientific journal, or is it maybe more gray literature so is it a report from the World Bank that maybe supports also a certain political agenda? If you have a scientific journal, maybe you could look into the impact factor. When you have found literature in Google Scholar, it often also mentions how often it is cited by others. Gives you also some credibility of that particular paper. You can ask yourself, okay, who is writing this paper? Are these authors that have published a lot of work on this particular topic? Maybe their affiliation to a particular university tells you something. So stay critical on the content. So particularly, is it supported by empirical evidence? And is it an empirical paper? But also, in what journal is it published? And who is actually writing it? And then, of course, also just remain critical from your own line of reasoning. And how does this relate to your own research question? And in how far does it enable you to write your literature review? So keep in mind that this is not just search and collection. It is an analytical work in which you are analyzing and discussing the literature around your topic. Then also discuss if you find that there are certain tensions, or is there a certain ongoing debate within your academic community. That can be debates around certain theories to use or certain methodologies to use, but also some conclusions that are discussed within this academic community. It is important to remember that the literature review is your literature. It should support your line of reasoning, that is the connection between the introduction of your research and your first objectives of your research and maybe the practical problem, the real life problem around the issue, the reason why you have started doing this research, and then your research questions. So keep in mind that with your literature review, it is a way to connect your first research problem with your refined research question. So there needs to be direction and a clear line of reasoning in your literature review. Very shortly, this was about the what, so let's go now to the how. So how are we doing? How are we starting this literature review, just going on the big internet and to the various libraries and Google Scholar to retrieve your literature, where to start? Well, might be logical, but you start, of course, in your research problem. So you have a certain, or your research topic, and you have a preliminary kind of research objective or research question. So what are the keywords in this research topic? What are the keywords? What are the concepts in your research problem description, in your research question, in your research objective? Use those as keywords in your literature search. Sometimes use a single keyword, and sometimes you use combinations of keywords. What most of the time does not make much sense is to write your full research question in the search bar, but use different keywords and different combinations of those keywords in your literature search. It might also mean, can also be that there are certain synonyms for certain words. And so make sometimes, and so maybe it's about, you want to do some research about public participation. Not only use public participation, but also search for stakeholder participation. And so make sure that you have different ways of searching for that literature. Then you have entered some of those keywords in, well, most likely Google Scholar, and then there is a whole list of sources that are popping up within a fraction of a second. And start first scrolling a bit through the titles that appear. And what are the titles that start resonating with you? And don't remain yourself for the first page only. Also go to page 2, page 3. Maybe you want to refine your search a little bit further, that you think, okay, let's more look for papers that have been published in a particular time frame. And so filter that for your search for a particular time frame. And look indeed for what are maybe the articles, well, first of all, which resonate with you, but how often are they also cited, and in which journals are they actually published. Then you have a paper, and of course you're not going to start reading that paper from the first letter to the last, so scan that paper, first maybe for the abstract, then maybe looking at the conclusions first, but think also for yourself, okay, what part of this paper is relevant for my literature review? So if your literature review is more for developing a theoretical framework, it's likely that you are going to focus more on the literature review part of that particular paper. Is it more on the methodologies used for your research, then focus on the methodological part of a paper? Is it more on the conclusions that are presented in the paper? Focus on the results and the conclusions of such paper. So really think strategically for yourself, what elements of this paper are relevant for my literature review in this case. And next, develop an annotated bibliography. In an annotated bibliography, you have a full reference of the paper, so that is the names of the author, the year, the title of the paper, the journal of the paper, the volume number, issue number, page numbers, preferably maybe also with a online URL reference. And under that reference, have a short description. Okay, this message, this lesson is useful for me, for my literature review. So write a short description why this is an important message for you, for your study. So not per se, what is the conclusion of this paper, and that is the message of the authors of that paper, but think really, why is this interesting for me and my literature review or my research. Then you have a whole list of references and the main messages of those papers in such kind of an annotated bibliography. And then you start, okay, what is the relation between these different papers? How do they relate to each other? Are they, for example, sharing similar ideas, or are they using similar methodologies, or do they have different views? Is it opposing views, or is complementary views? How do these different papers relate to each other? And then, of course, how does it relate to your research? And then also write down, so what does that, for your line of reasoning, what is your interpretation of those different viewpoints? So you have categorized those different references that you have, and then start creating a line of reasoning, a structure for your literature review. You can create somewhat of a table of contents of your literature review, of the different paragraphs that you are expecting to write. And make sure that every paragraph just contains one topic or one aspect. Then also group for those different aspects, what are then the references that you are going to refer to in those paragraphs. And this is also an interesting way to see, okay, I maybe am missing certain topics or aspects, which would make sense in my line of reasoning. So I need to search for a little bit more literature that could support me in writing about that particular aspect. And also make sure that your aspects or topics are not supported by one reference only. And so the more references you are able to present per paragraph, and I'm of course not saying that the more is always better, but stay critical again, but try to have more references around one topic per paragraph, and it's not dependent on just one reference, otherwise you get that pitfall of the container. Well, you created your structure with the different topics of the various paragraphs. What kind of references are you actually going to refer to in those paragraphs? So now you can start really writing. Always start writing an introductory paragraph. So in an introductory paragraph, you are going to explain your reader what they can expect in the following section or chapter, so that the reader is knowing already what to expect to read. Then follow the structure that you have created. So don't start free writing now suddenly, but you have your structure and start filling that structure with your paragraphs, with your writing. And possibly also that structure remain also headings or subheadings in your literature review, in order also to maybe guide your reader. And then remind your academic writing classes. So start every paragraph with a topic sentence to open up the paragraph. This is what this paragraph is about. Present then the information of that paragraph, and finish that paragraph also with either some sort of a concluding sentence or a bridge sentence to the next paragraph. Then you have written all that, then you do come to a conclusion of your literature review. But again, remind yourself, this is not a conclusion that is giving a conclusion or answer to your research question, but it gives you a conclusion of your analysis of the literature review. So what is the remaining knowledge gap, or what is an interesting way, a conceptual framework, to understand my research problem? Now, well, it is more or less finished, and now comes maybe the hardest part of it, is the editing part. So look back at your literature review again. Ask yourself, is it well written? Aren't there any, of course, the typos and the grammar, but also, again, think about the structure. Often it helps just also to read it out loud, and then suddenly you hear what you have written. Does it make sense? Is there a logical flow in my line of reasoning? But also, just does it look neat? Does it look well, and does it therefore also read well for my audience? And of course, part of that editing, reviewing, refining process is also about discussing it with your mentor and having some external eyes to look at your literature review. Last but definitely not least, you have searched literature. Hopefully you have created an annotated bibliography where you have mentioned all your references, but cite while you are writing. So do not think, okay, I can put in my references later. No, immediately put in your references when you are writing your various paragraphs. Not only in the text, but also put the full reference immediately in your reference list. Software like EndNote can help you with it, but of course, in the end, you need to do this. And it's just easiest and smartest to do this immediately when you are writing. This is what I would like to have shared about writing your literature review. On the website, there are more sources that hopefully support you in writing your literature review. And I wish you good luck with writing your literature review.